Our reading this morning is called Wild Emancipation for All of Us, and it comes from Rebecca Tausig's book, Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary, Resilient, Disabled Body. When I was small and just learning how to do life in my body, I didn't hesitate, didn't hold back, didn't worry how it would look, didn't look for cues or ask for a line. My imagination ruled. I was entirely free to be, driven by the innovation my body inspired. This is the wild emancipation I wish for all of us. A world where all are free to be, to move, to exist in our own bodies without shame. A world that isn't interested in making all of its humans operate in the exact same manner. A world that instead strives to invite more, include more, imagine more. That world sees the humans existing on the margins and says, you do have what we want. What barriers can we remove so that we can have you around? What do you need? How can we make that happen? So when I was in high school, I struggled with my math classes. And in college, in the only math course that I had to take, I got a D. And thank heavens that a D was a passing grade at that time at my alma mater, the University of Illinois at Chicago Circle. After college, I got a really good paying job that was well above minimum wage as a bank teller. I was slow in counting the cash. I kept making numeric errors in the data entry, inverting all sorts of numbers, having short-term memory issues, remembering simple sequences of digits. It was an unnerving experience. Although this was a really well-paying job, after 3 days, I had to quit because I couldn't stomach the stress that I was experiencing from the job. In graduate school, I was diagnosed with a mild form of dyslexia. For me, it primarily manifests with numbers, but it also affects the written word. I reverse and confuse numbers all the time. When I gave a new handyman our address in Howell, I inverted 2 numbers, and he couldn't find the address, and he was calling. And I saw this black pickup truck go back and forth up the street, and it's like, here we are, here we are. I can't tell you what time a train leaving Detroit, traveling at 60 miles per hour, will make a train leaving Chicago, traveling at 70 miles per hour, or where they'll meet. I have no idea. I just use the Amtrak train tracker and arrive at the Ann Arbor station to meet our house guests whenever that train arrives. My form of dyslexia is a mild one. For many, dyslexia is a serious hidden disability. Folks with more intense forms of dyslexia have terrible difficulties with math, with reading, with writing, with oral comprehension. Dyslexia itself can be a symptom of other issues, like attention deficit disorder or even attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Full stop. When I was composing the last sentence that I just said, I wrote the words a symptom twice in a row without thinking about it. That's a symptom of that literally is a symptom, no pun intended, of my verbal dyslexia. That happens frequently to me, and then I have to edit my own writing to see what weird mistakes I made in it. July is Disability Pride Month. It marks the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. President George H.W. Bush signed it into law on July 26, 1990. Disability Pride has become a month-long endeavor to honor the history, achievements, experiences, and struggles of folks living with disabilities, and many of them are hidden disabilities that we might not be aware of. Now, the ADA has a major loophole in it. Religious groups are exempt from Title III, the public accommodations provisions. Houses of worship don't have to have ramps to come to the entrance. They don't have to have wide doors so people with chairs and scooters and assisted devices could fit through them. They don't have to have compliant bathrooms with wide doors and all the handlebars in them, stuff like that. Churches are exempt from that. And for me, it's like, if churches are supposed to be the place where we welcome everybody into the human family, why are churches exempt from such accommodations, which are essentially universal accommodations? My 60-year-old body can't do the same thing that my 50-year-old body did, and having less stairs helps on the worst days. You know what I mean, right? So why is it that churches are exempt? Conservative evangelicals, such as the National Association of Evangelicals and the Association of Christian Schools International, those are the two big national evangelical groups. One deals with the churches, the other deals with their so-called schools, if you want to call them that. They opposed the ADA tooth and nail. They claimed that the ADA would be too costly for churches. It could be expensive, yes, admittedly, but if our stance is to welcome people in, isn't the cost an acceptable cost to accommodate the people that we have coming through our doors? They claimed that the ADA promoted homosexuality because it included people living with HIV and AIDS. What about the women? What about the children with HIV? We're talking about 1990 here, not 2024. HIV/AIDS was a very different thunderstorm back then than it is now. They claimed that the ADA was an, in direct quote, improper intrusion of the federal government, end quote, into the internal affairs of churches. In terms of today's political rhetoric, doesn't that claim sound like a separation of church and state claim? So you shouldn't be surprised by this, that these conservative evangelical groups are up to stuff like this. These types of conservative evangelical groups also opposed school integration in the 1950s, and they built their own all-white, racist, exclusionary schools. They supported miscegenation laws in the 1960s. They opposed the Equal Rights Amendment in the 1970s, leading to its ultimate demise. They have also opposed women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ civil rights, same-sex marriage, a living wage, healthcare for all, sensible gun control, and most recently, transgender rights, and for some reason, they also oppose drag shows. Their agenda just gives us a broader context for understanding the evangelical opposition to the ADA. Luckily for our country, the ADA passed, and it has helped so many people living in the United States in so many different ways. But, like I mentioned, churches were excluded from the Title III public accommodations provisions. Luckily for us here at CUUB, we purchased a property that was already ADA compliant. Look at the doors, they're wide enough for wheelchairs and scooters and strollers and stuff like that. We have ramps at every single door, no steps at any of the doors, no threshold steps. We have ADA compliant bathrooms, large space around the commode, the handlebars on the walls. We have assisted listening devices for people who need them here in the sanctuary. Those are just some of the things that CUUB has already accomplished physically in terms of being welcoming to all of humanity. But because we are a physically welcoming space, does that mean that we are welcoming and supportive of people living with differing abilities, especially if some of those might be hidden abilities. Our country does need something like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. May I remind you, a former presidential candidate physically mocked the reporter Sergei Kovalevsky for his arthrogryposis. I'm sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing the word. It's a congenital joint condition that limits movement in his arms and joints. The former president's actions were just plain cruel and inhumane. I can't imagine why anyone would have voted for someone with such a deplorable character, but so many people did in our country. I'm not endorsing or opposing a candidate for public office. I'm just raising questions and concerns about our nation's democracy. After that incident, discrimination and hate crimes against people living with disabilities increased in our country for that year. Year after year, 1% of hate crimes are targeted at people with disabilities. A fourth of adults living with a disability have experienced discrimination in either housing, employment, or public accommodations. A fourth. That is an incredibly large percentage of the population. In a very famous incident last December, the Reverend Dr. William Barber, a very well-known Christian, progressive Christian celebrity, was threatened with arrest and escorted out of a movie theater by police. He was using an ADA-compliant specialized medical chair that's not a wheelchair or a mobility scooter. And the theater told him, you can't bring in your own chair. You have to use one of the chairs that we provide. He has a disabling bone disease called ankylosing spondylitis. He can't bend his spine to sit in a chair like most of the rest of us can sit in. Now, the Reverend Barber, you might have heard of him. He is the head of two national civil rights groups, the Repairers of the Breach and the Poor People's Campaign, continuing the Martin Luther King-inspired Poor People's Campaigns from the 1960s, the civil rights era. His mistreatment gained national notoriety, and his mistreatment contrasts the countless undocumented, untold stories of people living disabilities who experience mistreatment because of their disabilities, usually alone and in silence. Now, the Reverend Barber is also Black, and he is heavy-set as well. His situation highlights the expansive intersectionalities of discrimination, disability discrimination, racist discrimination, and obesity discrimination. By the way, I found this out preparing for the sermon. Michigan is the only state that has made weight-based discrimination illegal. Other states are working towards it. We're the only ones so far. Congratulations, Michigan. Hey, there's Michigan. Okay, there's Michigan. It's because of situations like these that our country needs to have a Disability Pride Month. We celebrate the lives of people with disabilities. They contribute to our society. They contribute to the common good. Their love makes all of our love much more of a lived reality in our world. We seek ways to accommodate all people, given all of their needs and abilities. It's not just simply a welcoming presence, it's an attitude. How do we support someone with special needs? What can we do? That leads to an attitude of introspection for ourselves. What can I do personally to welcome others here, especially to welcome folks with abilities that are different than my own? Let's make that question more expansive. What can we do to welcome others here? Disability Pride Month can serve sort of like an inspiration. maybe CUUB can start an annual self-assessment during Disability Pride Month about how we welcome people with various disabilities and try to figure out what can we try out for the next year to become more of a welcoming congregation. Disability Pride seeks to live up to the promises of the American dream that all people are equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everyone in our country wants to pursue those goals, including people who have different abilities and challenges. Let's figure out how we can do that. As Unitarian Universalists, we understand that love is ultimately what binds people together. Love is ultimately that element, that glue, that inspiration that binds society together, makes society work. We seek to make a world that is more loving for all, for everybody. And we support, out of that love, we support people with differing abilities. We seek for them to thrive just as much as we seek for ourselves to thrive, not only as individuals in their own lives, but also as members of society at large. We all, in our own fashion, we all contribute to that glorious rainbow of human diversity. All people are sacred. And people come from a diversity of cultures, different experiences, different theologies. And this includes a great variety of mental and physical abilities and limitations. There's no such thing as normal. Our human life has evolved into a broad swatch of human diversity and different capabilities. All of nature has. We embrace it and we accept it as part of our human journey together with each other on this earth. And we seek to create a better world for all, where all people can thrive. We seek to create a beloved community. In our newly revised shared Unitarian Universalist values, quote, we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness, end quote. We say here at CUUB in our opening words on Sundays, in our printed publications on our website, all are welcome here at CUUB. That's true. And while all are welcome here at CUUB, we are also striving to become a more welcoming congregation for people with different abilities, with different needs. And that's striving, that's a goal. That's living into our value of shared love with each other.